He thought it was hilarious to ditch me in the middle of Italy with his friends. Let's see how she gets back, my husband Alex laughed, his voice cutting through the warm Tuscan evening air as he slammed the car door. The taillights of our rental Fiat grew smaller and smaller, disappearing around the bend of the narrow cobblestone street, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of his friends' raucous laughter. A month later, when he finally tracked me down to a sun-drenched villa in Greece, his face a mask of desperate remorse, he discovered I'd gotten back just fine. He also discovered that in my absence, I had systematically dismantled his life, emptied our accounts, and filed for divorce, proving that the funniest jokes are always the ones that have a punchline he never saw coming. I stood frozen in the piazza, the scent of jasmine and wood smoke suddenly cloying and suffocating. The argument, a stupid, pointless squabble that had started over a bottle of wine at dinner, had escalated with the speed of a wildfire. Alex, fueled by the sycophantic encouragement of his 3 college buddies, had become louder, more dismissive, his words turning from disagreement to outright mockery. "You're always so dramatic, Chloe," he'd sneered, throwing his hands up in theatrical exasperation for the benefit of his audience. "It's a guy's trip. I don't know why you even insisted on coming." The lie was so blatant it stole my breath. I hadn't insisted. I had been invited, or rather, commanded to come. Alex was closing a deal with an Italian investor, and the presence of his respectable architect wife was a required prop. The guy's trip was his reward, a week of unsupervised revelry tacked onto the end of my performance. But when the deal closed a day early, my usefulness had apparently expired. The fight had spilled out of the tiny trattoria and into the main square of the small hill town, a place whose name I couldn't even pronounce correctly. When I refused to back down, when I finally stood up for myself and told him his behavior was embarrassing, he decided to teach me a lesson. His friends, Mark, Kevin, and Liam, piled into the rental car, their faces alight with the cruel glee of schoolboys about to pull the wings off a fly. "Get in the car, Chloe," Alex had ordered. I stood my ground, my arms crossed. "Not until you apologize." "Fine," he'd said, a slow, malicious grin spreading across his face. "Have it your way. Your purse has your passport, right? Then you'll figure it out. You're so smart, always telling me what to do." The click of the door, the squeal of the tires, the fading laughter, it all happened in less than 30 seconds. The town square, which had seemed so charming and picturesque moments before, suddenly felt menacing. The ancient stone buildings loomed over me like silent, judgmental witnesses. I counted my cash. 87 euros. My credit cards were in my main suitcase, which was in the trunk of the car speeding away from me. My phone was in my hand, but when I tried to call him, it went straight to voicemail. Blocked. I tried Mark. Blocked. Kevin. Blocked. A cold, heavy dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a fit of pique. This was calculated. This was a planned humiliation. For years, I had made myself smaller to fit into Alex's world. He was a force of nature, a charismatic, impulsive man who lived for adventure and the adoration of his friends. I was the quiet, steady one, the one who managed the details of our life while he chased thrills. I'd left a promising position at a prestigious architecture firm in Chicago to move to his hometown, telling myself that my freelance work would be more fulfilling. I'd learned to bite my tongue when his friends made sexist jokes, to smile politely when he'd forget important dates, to be the responsible adult so he could remain the carefree boy. I had convinced myself that this was the price of admission for loving a man so full of life. Now, standing alone in a foreign town as darkness began to fall, I realized it wasn't a price. It was a tax, one that had slowly eroded my sense of self until I was little more than an accessory to his life. I found the cheapest and I could, a dusty one-star pensione above a bakery. The elderly woman who ran it spoke no English, but she understood the universal language of a woman in distress. She patted my arm sympathetically as she showed me to a small, stuffy room with a lumpy bed and a single window that overlooked a dark alley. I lay on that bed for hours, staring at the water-stained ceiling, cycling through a dizzying carousel of emotions: rage, fear, disbelief, and a profound, soul-crushing heartbreak. The man I had promised to love and cherish had deemed me disposable enough to be discarded as a prank. Sleep didn't come. Instead, a strange, cold clarity began to emerge from the wreckage of my emotions. He expected me to panic. He expected me to call my parents, weeping and begging for a flight home. He expected me to return defeated, ready to apologize for whatever crime I had committed by having an opinion. He expected me to have learned my lesson. And I had, just not the one he intended to teach. As the first light of dawn filtered through the grimy window, I made a decision. I would not call my parents. I would not go home. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. He had left me stranded, expecting me to find my way back to him. Instead, I would find my way back to myself. I got up, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a new, unfamiliar glint of determination. Alex thought this was the end of an argument. He had no idea it was the beginning of a war. The first 24 hours were a lesson in humility and resourcefulness. My 87 euros had to stretch to cover the room, food, and a way out. I skipped breakfast, the aroma of fresh bread from the bakery below, a form of sweet torture. My first stop was the local police station, the Carabinieri. The officer on duty was a kind, weary-looking man who listened patiently to my story, pieced together with my broken high school Italian and frantic hand gestures. He nodded sympathetically, but his expression told me what I already knew. A husband abandoning his wife after a fight was a domestic dispute, not a crime. He filed a report, gave me a cup of strong, sugary coffee, and wished me luck. It was clear I was on my own. I spent the morning walking the perimeter of the small town, my impractical sandals, bought for elegant dinners, rubbing my feet raw on the ancient cobblestones. I was searching for a way out, a bus station, a train, anything. I found a small travel agency tucked away on a side street. The woman inside, a chic, middle-aged brunette, looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion as I asked about bus routes. My options were limited and expensive. A bus to Florence, then a train to Rome, then a flight home would cost hundreds of euros I didn't have. As I stood outside the agency, the reality of my situation hit me with full force. I was trapped. I leaned against a stone wall, the rough surface digging into my back, and fought the urge to break down. Crying in a public square would solve nothing. I needed a plan. I needed assets. My eyes fell to my left hand. My wedding ring, a classic platinum band with a 2-carat diamond, felt suddenly heavy, a shackle binding me to a man who had left me to fend for myself. Beside it was the sapphire ring my grandmother had left me, my most prized possession. The decision was agonizing but necessary. I found a small jewelry shop with a sign in the window, Compro Oro, we buy gold. The shopkeeper was an old man with eyes that had seen a lifetime of stories like mine. He examined the rings under a loupe, his face impassive. He named a price in euros, a number that was undoubtedly a fraction of their worth, but felt like a king's ransom to me. I hesitated for only a second, the image of Alex's laughing face flashing in my mind. I slid the rings off my finger and pushed them across the counter. The absence of their weight on my hand was a shock, a sudden, startling lightness. I walked out of that shop with a thick wad of cash in my pocket and a feeling of terrifying, exhilarating freedom. I was no longer Alex's wife, not in any way that mattered. I was just Chloe, a woman with a passport and enough money to disappear. I went back to the travel agency. The same woman looked at me with surprise as I spread a map of Europe on her counter. I didn't want a flight home. I want a way forward. Where can this take me? I asked, pointing to my pile of euros. I wanted the furthest, most remote coastal village she could find, a place where no one would think to look for me. We pieced together an itinerary, an overnight bus to Brindisi, a port city on the Adriatic coast, then a ferry to Greece. From there, another series of buses would take me to a tiny fishing village on the Peloponnesian coast she'd once visited as a girl. A place, she said with a wistful smile, where time seemed to slow down. That night, as I sat on the rumbling overnight bus, the Italian countryside a dark, blurry dream outside my window, the full weight of what I was doing settled over me. This was not a rational decision. A rational person would have swallowed their pride, called their father for a wire transfer, and been home in 24 hours. But the woman I had been, the one who always made the rational choice, the one who smoothed things over and avoided conflict, had been left behind in that piazza. This was an act of rebellion, a desperate, defiant roar against years of being silenced. The journey was a blur of uncomfortable seats, lukewarm coffee, and the anonymous companionship of fellow travelers. I slept in fits and starts, waking up with a jolt of panic each time, the memory of Alex driving away replaying in my mind. But with each mile that passed, with each new landscape that unfolded outside my window, a subtle shift was happening inside me. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was being replaced by something else, a flicker of curiosity, a sense of adventure I hadn't felt since before I met Alex. I arrived in the Greek village of Kardamili 2 days later, disheveled, exhausted, and utterly alone. The air smelled of salt, wild oregano, and hot dust. Whitewashed houses with blue shutters clung to the hillside, overlooking a turquoise bay. It was beautiful, but its beauty felt alien, almost mocking. My remaining cash would last me a week, maybe 2 if I was frugal. I had no plan, no contacts, and a vocabulary of about 5 Greek words. I found a small room to rent above a taverna, a simple, clean space with a narrow bed and a balcony that overlooked the sea. The first few days, I barely left the room. I was adrift, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was not my own. I'd watch the local fishermen mend their nets, listen to the lively chatter from the taverna below, and feel a profound, aching loneliness. The temptation to give up, to call home and admit defeat was immense. But then I would remember Alex's laughter, and a stubborn, defiant anger would rise up, pushing back the despair. On the 5th day, I forced myself to walk. I followed a dusty path out of the village, up into the hills, through groves of ancient, gnarled olive trees. The sun was merciless, the air thick with the sound of cicadas. I walked for hours, my mind a blank slate, my body moving on autopilot. I didn't realize how dehydrated I was until the world started to tilt, the silver-green leaves of the olive trees blurring into a shimmering haze. My knees buckled, and the last thing I remembered was the dusty ground rushing up to meet me. I awoke to the sensation of a cool cloth on my forehead and the sound of a woman's voice speaking in gentle, melodic Greek. I was lying on a simple cot in a cool, dark room. An elderly woman with a deeply wrinkled face and kind, dark eyes was sitting beside me, dabbing my face with a damp rag. When she saw my eyes open, she smiled and offered me a glass of water. Her name was Eleni. Her husband, Nikos, had found me collapsed on the path near their farm. They had carried me back to their small stone farmhouse, a place that seemed to have grown out of the hillside itself. They were olive farmers, their family having tended the same groves for generations. They took me in without question, offering me food, water, and a safe place to rest. They didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Greek, but over the next few days, we found a way to communicate through gestures, smiles, and the universal language of shared meals. I tried to offer them money for their kindness, but they refused with a vehement shake of their heads. Instead, Eleni pointed to the olive groves, then to my hands, then to her own. The message was clear. If I wanted to repay them, I could work. The first day of the harvest was brutal. The sun was relentless, the work backbreaking. My city-soft hands were blistered and raw within hours. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know were possible. But as I worked alongside Eleni and Nikos, raking the ripe olives on a net spread beneath the ancient trees, something began to heal inside me. The physical exhaustion was a balm, silencing the frantic, circular thoughts that had tormented me for weeks. My world shrank to the simple, satisfying rhythm of the harvest. The feel of the rough bark, the scent of the crushed olives, the shared lunches of bread, cheese, and tomatoes under the shade of a fig tree. In the evenings, I would sit on their small porch, watching the sunset paint the Messinian Gulf in shades of fire and gold, and feel a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had been in Cardamili for 3 weeks when the past finally caught up with me. I had developed a routine. Mornings were spent in the groves, afternoons helping Eleni in the kitchen, learning to cook simple, delicious meals with ingredients from their garden. I had started sketching again, filling a notebook with drawings of the landscape, of Eleni's weathered hands, of the fishing boats in the harbor. The woman who had collapsed on the road was gone. In her place was someone stronger, tanner, her hair cut short and practical, her hands calloused but capable. I had bought a cheap, used smartphone in the village and had been using it to discreetly manage my affairs back home. I had found a lawyer through an online service, a woman who specialized in international divorce cases. I had given her limited power of attorney, and she had begun the slow, methodical process of untangling my finances from Alex's. We discovered that he had been lying about his own income for years, hiding assets in offshore accounts, while simultaneously spending lavishly from our joint accounts. The abandonment in Italy was not just an act of cruelty, it was a legal gift. It gave my lawyer the justification to file for an emergency freeze on all our shared assets, protecting what was left of my money from his reach. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my lawyer. Alex had found her. He had been served the divorce papers and had apparently had a complete meltdown. He was alternately threatening to sue her for malpractice and begging her for my location. He knows you're in Greece, she warned. He hired a private investigator. He's on his way. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wasn't ready. I looked around the peaceful farmhouse, at the olive groves shimmering in the afternoon sun. This place had become my sanctuary, and now he was coming to defile it. Eleni must have seen the look on my face. She came and sat beside me, placing her warm, work-worn hand over mine. She said something in Greek, her voice soft but firm. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning. You're not alone. He arrived 2 days later. I was in the courtyard, sorting olives with Eleni, when a sleek black rental car, utterly out of place on the dusty farm road, pulled up. Alex got out. He looked thinner, his usually perfect tan faded, his expensive clothes wrinkled and travel-stained. He saw me, and his face crumpled with a relief that was so performative it was insulting. Chloe, thank God. I've been out of my mind with worry. He rushed toward me, his arms outstretched, but I didn't move. I just stood there, holding a handful of olives, my face a blank mask. Eleni rose slowly, positioning herself between us, a small, fierce protector in a black dress. Alex stopped, his expression shifting from feigned relief to annoyance. Who is this? Can you ask her to give us some privacy? I spoke to Eleni in my now passable Greek, telling her it was okay, that I could handle this. She gave me a worried look, but retreated to the doorway of the house, watching. What do you want, Alex? I asked, my voice flat. What do I want? I want my wife back. This has been the worst month of my life. The police were questioning me. Your parents think I'm a monster, and my accounts have been frozen. Do you have any idea what you've done? The blame, the complete lack of self-awareness, was so predictable. I just looked at him. You abandoned me in a foreign country without money or a way home. What did you think would happen? It was a joke, Chloe. A stupid joke that went too far. I'm sorry, okay. I'm so sorry. Let's just go home. We can fix this. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. There is no home to go back to, I said. I've filed for divorce. His face went slack with disbelief. Divorce? You can't be serious. This is just because you're angry. You'll get over it. No, Alex. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. I looked past him at the ancient olive trees, at the turquoise sea in the distance. I'm happy here. Happy. He scoffed, his voice rising. Here, in this dirt patch, with these peasants. Look at you. You're wearing rags. Your hands are ruined. This isn't you, Chloe. The woman I married is an architect. She wears designer clothes. She belongs in Chicago with me. The woman you married doesn't exist anymore, I said quietly. You killed her when you drove away and left her in that piazza. This is who I am now. He stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time. The strength in my posture, the clarity in my eyes, the complete absence of the woman he thought he could control. The realization that he had lost, that his prank had backfired in the most spectacular way possible began to dawn on him. My lawyer says you've been hiding money, I continued, my voice as calm as the still afternoon air. Offshore accounts. It seems that while you were teaching me a lesson about independence, I was learning a few things about your finances. His face turned from pale to a blotchy red. You had no right. I had every right. It's my money you were hiding. He started to protest, to argue, but the fight had gone out of him. He looked around at the simple stone house, at the endless groves of olive trees, at me. He had come here expecting to find a damsel in distress, ready for rescue. Instead, he had found a queen in her own kingdom, a kingdom he had no power in. Get off my property, I said, the words feeling solid and real in my mouth. Nikos appeared from the olive press, wiping his oily hands on a rag. He was a large, silent man who had said little to me over the past month, but his protective presence was unmistakable. He stood beside me, his arms crossed, a silent, immovable wall. Alex looked between us, his last vestiges of arrogance crumbling into pathetic desperation. Chloe, please, he whispered. I just turned my back on him and walked toward the house, back to Eleni, back to my new life. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to. The sound of his car engine, a final, angry roar before it faded into the distance, was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The joke wasn't on me. It was on him. He had thought he was stranding me, but he had only set me free. And in doing so, he had stranded himself, alone with the consequences of his own cruelty. That evening, the three of us sat on the porch, sharing a simple meal of fish that Nikos had caught that morning. The air was soft, the sky a tapestry of stars. The rental car was gone, a bad dream that had briefly disturbed the peace of this place. Eleni raised her glass of homemade wine. To new beginnings, she said in Greek. I raised my glass to meet hers. To new beginnings, I repeated, the words feeling more true than anything I'd said in years. My life in Chicago, my marriage to Alex, it all felt like a story that had happened to someone else. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. It was messy, but my lawyer was brilliant. Alex, faced with irrefutable evidence of financial fraud and legal abandonment, had little leverage. He lost everything: the house, the offshore accounts, the reputation he had so carefully cultivated. His friends, the ones who had laughed as they drove away, scattered like rats from a sinking ship when they realized he was no longer their ticket to a good time. I stayed in Greece. I invested the money from the settlement into Eleni and Nikos's farm. We built a new, modern olive press, expanded our distribution, and created a brand for our organic, hand-harvested olive oil. I designed the labels myself, simple and elegant, featuring a sketch of an ancient olive tree. My architecture skills found a new purpose in designing a small guest house on the property for visitors who wanted to experience the harvest. I had found a new kind of architecture, not of buildings, but of a life. A life built on a foundation of honesty, hard work, and the quiet, enduring strength of the land. I speak Greek now fluently. I can cook a 7-course meal using only what we grow in our garden. My hands are still calloused, my hair still short, my skin still kissed by the Mediterranean sun. I am unrecognizable from the woman Alex left behind in Italy, and for that, I am eternally grateful. Sometimes I receive letters from my parents forwarded through my lawyer. They're full of worried questions and pleas to come home. They don't understand the choice I have made. They can't comprehend why I would trade a life of luxury for one of simple, physical work. But they don't know the peace that comes from watching the sun rise over the Aegean Sea, the satisfaction of turning the soil with your own hands, the joy of sharing a meal with people who love you for who you are, not for what you have. About a year after he left, I received one final email from Alex. It was a pathetic, rambling message forwarded by my lawyer. He was working in a low-level sales job, living in a small apartment. He wrote that he had changed, that he understood his mistakes, that he still loved me. He ended the email with a single, desperate question. Don't you miss what we had? I thought about it for a moment, sitting on my porch, a sketchbook in my lap, the scent of olive blossoms in the air. I thought about the laughter, the adventure, the man I had once loved so fiercely. And I realized, with a clarity that was as bright and sharp as the Greek sun, that I didn't miss what we had. I was too busy building what I had now. I deleted the email without responding. Some questions don't need an answer. Some stories are simply over. Mine was just beginning.